Hello and welcome to this Thursday edition of Global Lens on News9 Live. With me, Neha, Khanna. We have a packed show for you, including a big exclusive interview coming up. Well, we are going to start with the latest from the BRICS summit. A day after Prime Minister Narendra Modi, while addressing the BRICS summit in Johannesburg, made it clear that India fully supported the expansion of the bloc, the BRICS grouping announced that it would invite 6 nations to become full members. These countries are Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Argentina, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. They will now join Brazil, Russia, China, India and South Africa in the bloc, and their membership will take effect from the 1st of January next year. The host, South African President Ramaphosa, said, "We have consensus on the first phase of this expansion process and other phases will follow." The inclusion of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, Iran and Egypt marks the first MENA representation in the group, and the inclusion of Argentina was championed by member Brazil. The expansion was pushed heavily by Russia and China, who are facing pushback from Western countries in the form of sanctions. Chinese President Xi Jinping said this membership expansion is historic. It's a new starting point for BRICS cooperation. It will bring new vigor to the BRICS cooperation mechanism and further strengthen the force for world peace and development. Significantly, all 6 new entrants have signed agreements to join China's Belt and Road Initiative, which India has refused to be a part of. The push for expansion was largely driven by China, but had the backing of South Africa and Russia, which is of course grappling with diplomatic isolation because of the Ukraine war. More than 40 countries had expressed interest in joining BRICS, and 23 formally applied to join the club, which already represented a quarter of the global economy and 40% of the world's population. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, "I take this opportunity to welcome these 6 nations to BRICS. I congratulate the leaders and people of these nations. India has close ties, historic ties with each of these countries, and I believe we will work together for a new era of cooperation and prosperity." Analysts say India is hardly in a position to be seen as non-inclusive, given its stated desire to be a voice of the global south. Therefore, it is likely that New Delhi will push for the inclusion of countries such as Indonesia and other democracies instead of countries like Venezuela or Iran that are likely to push the group in a direction that Beijing wants.
हमने ब्रिक्स की 15वीं वर्षगांठ पर इसका विस्तार करने का महत्वपूर्ण फैसला लिया है। जैसा मैंने कल कहा था, भारत ने ब्रिक्स की सदस्यता में विस्तार का हमेशा से पूरी तरह समर्थन किया है। भारत का ये मत रहा है कि नए सदस्यों के जुड़ने से ब्रिक्स एक संगठन के रूप में मजबूत तथा हमारे सभी साझा प्रयासों को एक नया बल देने वाला होगा। इस कदम से विश्व के अनेक देशों का मल्टीपोलर वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर में विश्वास और सुदृढ़ होगा। मुझे खुशी है कि हमारी टीम्स ने मिलकर एक्सपांशन के गाइडिंग प्रिंसिपल्स, स्टैंडर्ड्स, क्राइटेरिया और प्रोसीड्यूर पर सहमति बनाई है, और इनके आधार पर आज हम अर्जेंटीना, इजिप्ट, ईरान, सऊदी अरब, इथियोपिया और यूएई का ब्रिक्स में स्वागत करने के लिए सहमत हुए हैं।
Leaders of the 5 countries unanimously agreed to invite Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Argentina, Iran, and Ethiopia to the BRICS family as official members. China congratulates these countries and highly appreciate the efforts made by our chair, South Africa, and President Ramaphosa.
All right, for more on this story, let's now go across to senior journalist Manish Chand, who joins me live from Johannesburg, where all the BRICS action is unfolding. Also with me on the show, Ramakrishnan Sridharan, consulting editor with News9, joining us live from Washington, D.C. A warm welcome to both of you. Manish, let me start with you. The big news emerging from Johannesburg today, of course, is BRICS expansion. Now, what really were the primary driving factors behind the inclusion of these specific 6 nations into the BRICS fold?
Thank you, Neha. The expansion of the grouping has taken place. This was a big takeaway from the BRICS summit here. And from what I know, there was intense contestation on who gets in and who gets left behind. The Sherpas were busy over the last few days trying to sort out. There were differences on some countries. But let me tell you why this collection of 6 countries. Now, these 6 countries are all from the global south. They are all developing countries, emerging economies. This was a major criteria which India has pushed forward and others agreed to, that all aspiring, all candidate countries, new members, should be emerging economies. So that was number one, the global south, which is going to play a bigger and bigger role in the BRICS architecture in days to come. Now, the second big factor was to have a regional balance of sorts. If you look at the current BRICS of 5 countries, these are 5 countries straddling 3 continents. But regions were excluded. And there was only one representative from Africa, which is South Africa. So it is very significant on the African soil. You have 2 new members countries coming in, Ethiopia and Egypt. Now, Ethiopia is a headquarter of the African Union. So the decision to include Ethiopia was also to provide a bigger voice to Africa and a representative country, so to speak. Egypt has a dual identity. It is the largest and most influential, one of the most influential countries in the Muslim Arab world. It is also a big African country. So bigger representation to Africa. Now we have 3 countries from Africa in BRICS. And another region which was excluded so far, which are not part of the BRICS, is now very much in. And these are UAE, Saudi Arabia, UAE and Saudi Arabia. Now these are big countries, and Iran as well. Now you see Iran and Saudi Arabia, as you know, do not see an eye to eye on so many issues. But they're both in, and this involved a lot of internal discussion. Last I heard was that, in fact, till the night before, that there was no consensus on Iran. Because one of the criteria that has been decided, although criteria have not been unveiled in the joint statement, have not been made public, we know some criteria were being discussed. And one of them at that point was that any new member country should not have sanctions against them. So finally, what tipped the favor in what swung it for Iran was its stature as the largest, the most influential country in that part of the world. It's a regional power, although a regional power which is not friendly to the West, but an important player. And the idea was to also balance Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, as you know, are the big economies. They're the resource-rich countries. So what you have now, and Argentina presence was to include Latin America, to provide a bigger voice to Latin America. Earlier, it was only Brazil, which is part of the grouping. Now we have Brazil and Argentina. So overall, with the inclusion of these 6 countries, you have a more balanced representation in terms of region-wise. All important regions are now inside the BRICS. That adds to, enhances BRICS stature and BRICS voice in the international arena. Many factors went into the selection of these countries. And one of the things I want to point out is this, that there was a spin given by a lot of people before the expansion took place, that India and China are engaged in a power struggle, that China will get its own allies inside the grouping. and all that, that will become a China-dominated grouping. But if you look at the new members, they are, of course, friends of China, but they are also friends of India. With Saudi Arabia, we have transformed the relationship. UAE is one of our biggest trading partners. With Argentina, relations are excellent. So, and with Iran as well. In fact, India played an important role in Iran's inclusion. If you recall, just before Prime Minister came to Johannesburg, the two leaders had a telephonic conversation. And India did not dump Iran even at the height of the nuclear deal. So what we are having is that they're all also friends of India. So to say that China has,
so time to stop being cynical. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
okay,
right. That's a very comprehensive perspective you've given us on today's big developments. Thanks very much, Manish, for that. So greater representation of all regions and certainly more representation for the global south, the emerging economies. Thanks very much for that, Manish. Let me go back to Shri at this point. Shri, yes, these are emerging economies. Yes, India does have good relations with many of them. But again, I don't want to sound cynical, but another common thread that binds these 6 new entrants together is the fact that they're all signatories to China's Belt and Road Initiative. How should we see that?
Okay, so Neha, on Global Lens, we did say at the 3 days ago when we started coverage on the BRICS summit that the expansion will be one of the key focus areas of this summit. And we have been proved right. The other thing we have said on the show is that the member countries will be allowed on a consensus basis as long as they meet some strategic needs. So let me add to what Manish was talking about, that this is a bigger confederation of global South. But to my mind, Neha, what is significant is that we have 3 large oil-producing countries which have been inducted into BRICS: Saudi Arabia, Iran, and UAE. Now, as we know, Saudi Arabia alone accounts for 17% of global oil exports. And India and China are the two biggest customers of Saudi Arabia. 35% of Saudi Arabia's oil exports go to India and China. So I think at this point, more than political, I think the economic rationale of what is the value addition that these new members are going to bring to this group is probably what has played on the minds. And therefore, to that extent, the decision on who comes in and who doesn't come in was less contentious, because all the key members had a certain commodity which all countries want, except for Iran, of course, which is under sanction, US sanction, and India has not bought any oil from Iran since 2019. Now, what this induction, the theory that this is going to intensify is basically the fact that will the oil buying countries be able to move away from dollar purchase of crude oil. Now, while that remains a possibility, and China still buys crude oil from Iran, it's also a bigger customer of Saudi Arabia than India is.
Right.
So China has been pushing purchase of yuan for oil purchases. But to my mind, Neha, while this could be a possibility, it is a long haul, because at the end of the day, I, as Saudi Arabia, I'm a commodity seller. I sell oil, and I'll sell it to anyone who wants it. And the most important thing to remember about money, Neha, is that it serves 2 purposes. One, it is a store of value, and it must be fungible. What do I mean by fungible? That it is readily usable when I want to spend it to buy any other item. In the case of Saudi Arabia, it needs a lot of defense equipment. That is going to come from America, Neha, and for that, it will need the dollars. But finally, Neha, just another 10 seconds. I don't think Saudi Arabia is going to jeopardize its relationship with the US just because it's now part of BRICS. US has been the most important partner for Saudi Arabia, and that is not going to change in a hurry, Neha.
Absolutely. And interesting you say that de-dollarization is definitely far-fetched at this point. All right, let's now move on to our next story. In a stunning development in Russia, the Wagner mercenary group chief Yevgeny Prigozhin was on the passenger list of a plane that crashed in Russia on Wednesday, according to the press service of Russia's Federal Air Transport Agency. 62-year-old Prigozhin is now presumed dead. 10 people were presumably killed in this crash near the town of Kuzhenkino. The plane was en route from Moscow to St. Petersburg. Unsurprisingly, an advisor to the Ukrainian President Zelensky said in a statement, the demonstrative elimination of Prigozhin and the Wagner commander 2 months after the coup attempt is a signal from Putin to Russia's elites ahead of the 2024 elections. US President Joe Biden told reporters, I don't know for a fact what happened, but I'm not surprised. There's not much that happens in Russia that Putin is not behind. The White House National Security Council spokesperson said, if confirmed, no one should be surprised. The disastrous war in Ukraine led to a private army marching on Moscow, and now it would seem it has led to this. Prigozhin was the head of the private paramilitary organization Wagner Group, which played a key role in Russia's invasion of Ukraine before briefly launching an insurrection against the Russian military in June. Forces loyal to Prigozhin marched towards Moscow before turning back. Prigozhin allegedly struck a deal subsequently with Russian President Vladimir Putin, where he did not face prosecution and was relocated to Belarus, according to the Kremlin. The Russian president and Prigozhin, in fact, even met face-to-face, according to the Kremlin, on the 29th of June, less than a week after the failed coup. On the 3rd of July, Prigozhin released a message on social media claiming the revolt was aimed at fighting traitors and mobilizing our society, as he put it. Now, even as we wait for an official confirmation of his death, the question is, wasn't Yevgeny Prigozhin a dead man walking since that day in June when he decided to take on Vladimir Putin, mount a coup against him and his military, and humiliate him before the Russians and the world? Wasn't that failed coup Prigozhin's death warrant? What happens now to the Wagner Group and to Russia's war against Ukraine?
We have nothing to do with this situation, that's for sure. I think everyone knows who this concerns.
I don't know for a fact what happened, but I'm not surprised.
Do you think Putin was responsible?
There's not much that happens when Russia and Putin are not behind, but I don't know enough to know the answer.
All right, Shri is still with us from Washington, D.C. Also joining us at this point is Ambassador Suresh Goyal, former diplomat. For months now, Ambassador Goyal, I've been asking on this show, and you've been on many of those shows with me, is Yevgeny Prigozhin a dead man walking? Even as we wait for an official confirmation of whether he indeed died in that crash, all indications are that he did. The question really is, did he not sign his own death warrant the day he decided to mount a coup against Vladimir Putin? I mean, who launches a rebellion against Vladimir Putin and gets away with it?
Absolutely, Neha. I'm good to be back with you once again. Good question, really. The point is that Prigozhin should have known the day he tried to take on Putin in the coup. Putin is ex-KGB, a strong man. He has dealt with the situation for a long time. He remained calm and very quiet and measured during the entire episode. And even after this crash, there is hardly anything that he has said. Now, we do not know whether he's still walking or not, but he's not visible anymore, really. And that is important. The point really here is not whether Prigozhin is walking, he's invisible. Where he is and where he is not, there will be conspiracies and we will never know the truth. Maybe he was there, maybe Putin was behind it, maybe he was not, but that is immaterial. But what it does really prove one thing is that Putin as an enemy for the West is not an easy nut to crack. And therefore, if Biden thought that he could use Zelensky to keep Putin in check, he must now know that it is not it is not an easy thing to do, really. And therefore, that this conflict, and I will not call it Ukraine. Ukraine is only a proxy, really, in that sense. If by now Zelensky has not realized that this entire episode, it is Ukraine which is suffering, not Russia. Russia is suffering, but not that much, really. And all speculations are that Ukraine is not really winning the war. Whether they're losing or not is an entirely different matter. But the fact is that if Biden thought that using Ukraine, he could minimize, diminish Putin, he should realize that it is not going to be an easy task anymore. And I think that is what is important. So the only two alternatives now before the world would be either we continue to face a long drawn out war. Would that be actually in favor of the USA? Or we try to find a solution where there is a possibility of Europe coming back on track economically again, which I think is a better alternative, but unlikely. Neha.
All right, interesting. You've also given us a larger perspective on where you think the Ukraine war goes from here. Shri, coming to you. Zelensky says, I'm not surprised. Joe Biden says, I'm not surprised. Elon Musk also decides to weigh in saying, well, this actually took longer than I expected. Your thoughts, Shri, on what's gone down?
So Elon Musk is right, Neha, and I don't think Putin actually kept his calm. And how do we know that? Because June 24th, when the march on Moscow was mounted, Putin's plan was ready to wipe out Prigozhin and his entire Wagner, the key members of the group. But he was told to restrain himself by no other than the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. And how do we know this? Because Lukashenko himself told his military leaders and journalists in Belarus, and that's how this is known. So I'm not surprised that Prigozhin is now dead. He did mount what was the biggest embarrassment and the threat to Putin in his long career as the leader of Russia. And Neha, a lot of people may not know, but in Russia there's actually a law which Putin brought in, which said that anyone who rises against the government or does any act which embarrasses the government, or even against any official, a Russian official, they can be killed. And as the ambassador also said, the FSB, which was earlier the KGB, has actively killed many people who have seen to be inimical to Russia's interest, and especially people seen as traitors. And as far as traitors go, Neha, Prigozhin was the biggest, as big as they come. So it's not surprising at all that not just Prigozhin, but his core team, including the man who was running his operational, army, responsible for the logistics of it, Dmitry, he's been killed as well in the crash. So, Kremlin has struck, and it has struck comprehensively at the Wagner Group.
Absolutely. None of us are surprised. Many analysts have pointed out that this aborted coup was the biggest challenge mounted to Putin's authority in his 25-year reign. And I'm reminded today of what the CIA chief William Burns said. He said Putin is the ultimate apostle of payback. Do we have yet another evidence of that today? Gentlemen, completely out of time, but it's been lovely talking to you, Ambassador Goel and Shri. Thank you so much for joining us on Global Lens tonight.
Bye.
Thank you, Neha.
All right, time for us to slip into a quick break here on Global Lens, but don't go anywhere. On the other side, an exclusive interview with Ambassador Harsh Shringla, India's G20 chief coordinator, the man who's also served as foreign secretary and right now is in the thick of things as far as the G20 summit is concerned.
China won't let us rest easy on our borders, but they will keep flooding our markets. What does Xi Jinping really want?
I think he wants the